Ooh, got a full house tonight. Okay. I wanted to talk about a topic tonight. Um, let's learn a piece of Gemara from Daf Ayin Hay, which is the daf from Sunday, I believe. Okay, we are on Daf Ayin Hay in Gittin. I'm at Aleph, about halfway down the page. Tana Gemara is talking about, for the last week or so, about conditions, right? Giving a get on condition. So the Gemara here has a question. Hareza gitach v'haniyar shali eno migoreshes. Gemara says that what if I say that here is your get, but I get to keep the paper? Okay, you get to keep the ink, I get to keep the paper. We say eno migoreshes. It doesn't work. It's not a good get. Almanasha tachaziri liyas haniyar. However, if he says this get is on condition that I get back just the paper, so we say migureshes. If he uses it as a condition, then it does work. So Gemara wants to know, Ma'ishna Reisho, Ma'ishna Sefer, what's the difference? Either way, the husband wants to retain the paper. How come it works if he phrases it as a conditional request? There it works, but it doesn't work if he just says, and I get it back. He doesn't make it on condition. So the Gemara, if you skip down about 5 or 6 lines, the Gemara goes through one try. It's not successful. And on the second try, the Gemara says, Ella Amar Abaya, Hamani Rab Meir He, Amar Bina Tonight Kafel. So the Gemara says, well, the reason why it doesn't work is because we need the help of Rav Meir. Rav Meir is of the opinion that you need, when it comes to certain things, we'll see exactly what it applies to, but at least when it comes to Gittin, when you make a get al tanai via a condition, it has to be a special type of condition, which is called a tanai kafel, which basically means it presents both sides. This is your get on condition that X happens, but this is not your get if X doesn't happen. Okay, that's the definition of a tanai kafel. V'hacha lo kafle l'tanai. Here, in this case over here, where the husband said, this is the get on the condition that I get the paper back, he did not make the second side of the argument. He said, this is the get on the condition I get the paper back, but he should have continued and says, but if I don't get the paper back, then it's not a get. So therefore, the conclusion of the Gemara is that it's not going to work. So what does that mean it's not going to work? His condition, as Rashi explains, is batel. And therefore, because his condition is batel, it's a good get. Again, it's important to understand this. What happens if he doesn't follow the rules of conditions? What happens is that his condition that he makes is useless. And therefore, it's as though he says, this is your get. So even if the condition isn't adhered to, nevertheless, the get still is a good get. Okay, so that is basically what the Gemara says over here. The end result is the Gemara actually goes on and say, well, it's not really true. We'll do just a little bit, because if we are going to talk about that, the reason is it's a problem with the Tanai, Maskefla Rava, time to kafel Tanai, hakafel Tanai lo havegita. So therefore, what? What if you did listen to Rav Meir and made a Tanai kafel? So then what? It is a get, right? I'm sorry, it is not a get, but michte kol Tanai mehecha gamrina. Now, where do we learn, says the Gemara, this concept that it has to be double-sided? Mitanai b'nei Gad u'b'nei Ruvain. It comes from the biblical story of Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven that we're going to see in a minute. Okay. Mahasam Tanai Kodum Lamaisa. Over there, there's the Tanai comes before the Maisa. So now we have to do a little bit of explaining. The Tanai is what we call the trigger. The Maisa is what's going to happen. Okay. So the trigger over here, in this case, is this is the get, on condition that I get that I get it back. The getting back the paper is the condition, and the giving over the get is the Maisa. But if you learn it from Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruvain, the rule is, the Gemara says, Av kol Tanai kodem l'maisa. You have to have the Tanai, which is what? The story, which we're going to see in a minute, says that if you cross over and are willing to fight with your brothers, that's the Tanai, then you can stay on the other side of the Yarden. But the Tanai has to come before. Here, the Tanai is coming after. Here, the Maisa is coming before the Tanai. Okay? So the Gemara leaves it at that, and we have another interpretation of why, what the difference is between the first case and the second case by the case of giving over the get. So here is the question. Question is, what's going on over here? What is this business of Rav Meir, and what is the source that Rav Meir is so insistent that it has to be exactly the way it was by Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruvain? So in order to answer that question, we need to see Gemara in Kiddushin. Okay, the source is a Gemara in Kiddushin, Daf Samach Aleph. Okay, let's read the Mishnah. It says the Mishnah on Daf Samach Aleph, on the bottom, 61a, toward the bottom. Rav Meir Omer, Kol Tanai, She'enu Ketanai B'nei Gad U'B'nei Ruvain, Eno Tanai. Okay, this is positioned in the middle of the third parak of Kiddushin, because just like for the last week and a half, we've been talking about various conditions of Gittin, so too, we already compared Gittin and Kiddushin. There are various conditions that you could apply when you're Mekadesh a woman. This is, I'm Mekadesh to you on the condition of X, Y, and Z. Whatever that is. There's many, many Mishnayos in Kiddushin that give examples. I Mekadesh you on the condition that you have a big house, that you have a certain car, that you have this, that you have that. So you have to keep up with the condition in order to be Mekadesh to this person. So our mayor says one of the specific details of a Tanai is that it has to be like the Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruvain. If it's not, says the Mishnah, then Enu Tanai Shenemar. So now we're going to look at the pasuk. The pasuk says in Matos, Vayomer Alehem Im Yavru Bnei Gad u'Bnei Ruvain. So toward the end of the story, right, after Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruvain pose their problem to Moshe, right? So the pasuk at the end says that Moshe said, here's the deal. Here's what I'll do for you. If you cross over, right, then that's fine. Then you could live on the other side. The im lo yavru chalutzim ... But if you don't cross over and arm yourselves and fight wars with the rest of your brothers, the other 10 tribes, then you can't. Okay, period. So that is the opinion of Rav Meir. Rashi explains what's going on over here. Rashi says, the first Rashi in the Mishnah, Kol Tanai, if you have the Mishnah in front of you, Kol Tanai, she'eno kaful kibnei Gad, eno Tanai, v'afal pi shelo niskayim hat Tanai, niskayimu hadvarim. Aha. So what's the punchline? Rashi says. So what if you don't listen to the rule? If you don't listen to the rule of Rav Meir, then the word is, then niskayimu hat Tanai, then even though the Tanai wasn't fulfilled, niskaimu hadvarim, you still have kiyum hadvarim, meaning that whatever you say goes, and the Tanai goes out the window. For example, could go and hareze gitach al menashe titni li matayim zuz. Sound familiar? So Rashi in Kedushin quotes exactly the Gemara that we had for the last few days, where he says, right? We had this Gemara on Shabbos, Daf Ayin Dalet, I think, right? A few days ago, where he wants money from her. He says, this is going to be your get only if you pay me, right? I'm not giving you a get for free. You got to pay me money. So what happens? So the Mishnah said, well, if she paid the money, then great. The get is in effect. If she doesn't come up with the money, then he's not giving her the get. So that's what we've been learning up to now. In Rav Meir's world, that doesn't work because he didn't do a Tanai Kafel. So therefore, what does it mean it doesn't work? That means that they're divorced, which is the Maisa. The Maisa is Chal, right? They are officially divorced, but the Tanai goes out the window. The condition of her paying up money doesn't have to be. That's negated. That's Bato. Says the Rashi, I'm continuing, and even if, right, she didn't pay the money, then we still say that the get is chal. So before we continue in Rashi, you may be wondering, how is that possible, right? If I sign a contract with someone and I say to buy a house and it's conditioned that I'm buying the house on the condition that it passes the inspection, right? And a week later, it doesn't pass the inspection. So according to Rav Meir, you still have to buy the house, right? That's what we're saying over here, right? This is a get on the condition that you pay me money. And he gives her the get. She doesn't come up with the money. In Rav Meir's world, because you didn't phrase it like a Tanai Kafel, right? A double-sided Tanai, we say that the Tanai goes out the window and you have to stick with your deal. And the get is chal. In this case, the house is still sold even if it didn't pass inspection. So there's something very strange. And the truth is, if you don't believe me that that's true, there's a Yerushalmi that says exactly the same thing. We're in the Yerushalmi in Kedushin chapter 3. The guy says, we will be, you're Mikudeshes to me on the condition that it rains later today. Yardu Geshamim Mikudeshes. If it rained, then the Tanai gets fulfilled and there's Kedushin. V'imla ve'enu Mikudeshes. Very simple. Rav Meir says, no, Ben Yardu Geshamim, Ben Yardu Geshamim. It doesn't matter what happens with the rain. Mikudeshes ad sheyichbol tano. Until he phrases the Tanai properly, we don't really care. He is Mikudeshes, whether it rains, whether it doesn't rain. And that's exactly the point of Rav Meir. So now, let's go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, this is the opinion of Rav Meir. Let's just finish the Mishnah because obviously we know that that's not held by everyone. Rabbi Chananya ben Gamliel Omer, Rabbi Chananya ben Gamliel says, we're back in the Mishnah in Kedushin. Tzarech hadavar la'omro. Rabbi Chananya ben Gamliel disagrees and says, no, you don't have to make a double Tanai. So hold on a second. If you don't have to make a double Tanai, then why did Moshe make a double Tanai? Right? The good question. What's going on in the Chumash? Why did Moshe make a double Tanai? She'el mole ken. Because if Moshe did not make a double Tanai, then the conclusion could have been Yesh b'mashmesh afilu beretz Kanaan lo yimchalu. If Moshe wouldn't have stressed, which after all, double Tanai is, we're going to see, is a stress. If he didn't stress this Tanai, then one could infer that if they didn't go out to war, if they went out to war and fought, then they could live on the other side of the Yarden. But you may infer, had it not been for the double Tanai, that what if they are lazy and don't go out to war? They don't go on the east side of the Yarden, and they don't go on the west side of the Yarden. They get nothing. That's the opinion of Hanan ben Gamliel. So you can't learn that you generally need a Tanai Kafel. This is a special case that Moshe had to stress, because if he didn't stress it, you would have thought that they got nothing. They wouldn't get any nachla at all in the world. That is the opinion of Hanan ben Gamliel. Okay. So I was thinking, we actually hold like Rav Meir. So if that's true, it's kind of illogical, right? It's kind of illogical because how do you explain to someone that this could work if you don't make a Tanai Kafel? Then why in the world would you think that if the condition isn't fulfilled, like that's the whole point? Let's get back to our case. This is the get on the condition that you give me money. So how does logic dictate that we could completely ignore your condition, right? Like the case with the house. How could that make sense? The seller says, because you didn't make a Tanai Kafel, therefore, whether the house passes inspection or not, you have to buy it. Well, why should I buy it? That's the whole reason why I bought it up, right? So it doesn't really make logical sense. So as I was thinking to myself, the word logical, I started to think back, and we're going to do a little chazara now of 9th grade algebra. And there's something I didn't understand. I didn't understand a lot in 9th grade, but one of them was this whole concept of the truth table, right? And part of 9th grade algebra on the curricula is the whole logic game, what we call if P then Q, right? We try to come up with a scenario where a statement could be true or a statement could be false based on, I think the technical word is antecedent. That's the if, and then right? Like we have a Tanai and a Maisa. So we say if P, right, then Q. So you line up there's 4 possibilities, right? The possibilities of P works and Q is true, then the statement is true. And if P isn't true and Q is true, right? There's 4 basically permutations for all those who remember how to set it up. So let's just think of an example for a second, and let's try to think how Rav Meir fits into this. And obviously, you could see already that the conclusion, which is usually the conclusion in this class, is that Rav Meir is actually right. Okay, the reason why he's right is because when you set up this truth table of P's and Q's. So let's take an easy example. If I say to someone, if I find an elephant in your house, okay, I'll give you $100. Okay, there's 4 possible outcomes of that statement, right? Let's say there's an elephant in his house, right? And I give him $100. That's true, right? I kept my word. So that means that the P is true and the Q is true. How about if I say, hey, there's an elephant in your house, and then I don't give you money? So that breaks the Tanai. So therefore, you have a false, right? So far, so good, right? It's understandable. Let's take the third case. Let's say if there's no elephant in the person's house and I don't give him the money. Well, that's also a true statement because that's the promise that he made, right? He's only going to give him money if there's an elephant. So there was no elephant in his house and he didn't give him any money. So far, so good, right? We're going to save the punchline for last. What's the last case? The last case is what happens if there's no elephant in the person's house and I still give the person money. Okay. Now this should ring a bell because this is Rav Meir's case, where P is not true, but Q is true, right? I give you the get, that's true, but the Tanai, in this case, giving over the $100 compared to the woman giving over $200 is not true. So how did we start off by saying, how could the get be good, right? He didn't get his money, and that's what his Tanai was. Okay, we don't deal with Tanai couples and logic. We could talk about why, but again, the purpose of the Tanai couple was to strengthen and embolden the statement. But in this case, if you were to ask someone, if you didn't find an elephant and you still gave him money, okay, is that considered a true statement or not? So the answer is, it's true. Most people would say it's not true because you made a deal. So this game of logic actually saves Rav Meir, because that's exactly what the point over here is. Now the question is, why? So we're close to understanding it, but the bottom line is, if he didn't keep his promise, again, his promise was, I'm not going to give you the money because there was no elephant in your house. So why in the world do we say that it's true if it breaks the rule? Okay, so when you look into it, it has to do with the fact that in most of these cases, first of all, math, okay, which this is a branch of mathematics, and the way we deal are different. So I'm telling this to you, you may not agree with me, but math and everyday, what we call ma'aseh b'chol yom, are much different. It only works in a math case, but we see it actually true with Rav Meir. And if you think about the logic, right, think about this question for a second, okay? And maybe this could answer why it actually does make sense. So let's say you have another P than Q. Let's say you say, if I put money into a soda machine, then a soda will come out, okay? So let's say you walk by and the soda machine, and soda comes out without you putting money into it, okay? And then the next person walks by and the soda automatically drops without you putting money into it. The question is, does that make the statement of, if I put money into a machine, the soda will come out, does it make that false? That's the question of the day. And if you really think about it, the answer is it doesn't make it false. Because why? Because it's almost like the Gemara would say, this is like a zechus for you. Because yes, it would work if you put money in it, the soda would come out, but because the soda is coming out without, that doesn't break the promise, right? It doesn't break the principle. Why? Because it's almost like no one's going to complain if sodas keep on coming out when you pass by. So because no one's going to complain, right? It's actually beneficial for the person. It's beneficial for us, right? So therefore, because we have this weird situation where something is happening, right? But no one's complaining. I don't mean that you could only apply this when there's a complaint or not, but the conclusion is that if you don't really have a ground for a complaint, then it doesn't break the rule, right? Because you could still put money in and soda will still come out. So I think based on all these logical permutations, I think this supports Rav Meir, right? Even though you would think that if he really wants to be divorced, that he would only accept the money, but really the money he's not so concerned with. Just like you're not so concerned about putting money in the soda machine. You would want a soda anyway, but what do you really want to do? You really want to get divorced, right? The Tanai is the money, but the bottom line is, however whatever happens, you ultimately want to get divorced. So too, just like you ultimately want to get divorced, you ultimately want to get the soda, the path to the as they say, the means to the end, we don't really care. We just care about the end. And I think, in a nutshell, without going too, all over the place with this, because there's ways to prove it with the contrapositive. We're not going to talk about that now, but I think this is really how Rav Meir supports his opinion from the logic table. In a more halachic or lumdish way, I saw an opinion from the Arvei Nachal. The Arvei Nachal is David Shlomo Eibeshitz. Okay, he was a Ukrainian born in the late 1700s. So here's what he says. He says, and I'm going to quote it, he says, you know why this works? He says, "V'hi noda ki kol tonight tzarich shia kafel dafka v'imeno kafel af beferish hu omer shenosin matana." He says, "Mikol makom kol delo kafel tanai." Okay, if you didn't be kofel the tanai, anu omrim sha'afal pisha notan b'shvil zat tanai. Even if, remember, if you didn't follow Rav Meir and you didn't do it double-sided, okay, even though he gave it on the condition, Mikol makom daito shagam im lo yiskayim hatanai, Mikol makom yiskayim hamaisa. The words of the Arvei Nachal is because a person is still cool with the results, even though he didn't get those results the way he imagined. Okay, again, back to the soda machine, right? You got the soda in a way you never imagined. Now, in that case, you got the soda for free, so you're not complaining, right? But again, we're concerned about the results. The condition, you're not so concerned about. So therefore, even if the Tanai didn't click, as he says, Mikol makom yiskayim hamaisa. So therefore, if you really want the condition to stick and be serious, his advice is Mishum hachi be'inan kaful. That's why it has to be kafel. Mavor b'poskim to lashon almanas lo be'ina tanai kafel. Okay, so that's what he says. He says that making it kafel strengthens it. Okay, so that's what we said before, and I think that's how all of this logic actually makes sense. So we spoke about a lot of things. I want to talk now about the actual source, because we just glanced through it. Rashi gave you his, a little bit of the background, but I want to talk about it. First of all, as I like to say, whenever we have portions of the Torah that we learn in the summer parshios, it's always good because these are parshios that we don't get to study a lot because we're away and it's July and it's August. To quote my teacher, they call it the hot summer parshas, right? The parshas that people neglect, right, is always everything from Korach to Kitetse, right? We're not experts in those parshios. So therefore, I want to take a minute and just review Bamidbar Lamed Beis, the very, very end of Parshas Matos, says the following. Okay, I'm in Numbers 32:1 at home if you have a Chumash. We're going to just glance through the psukim because we actually have to know what the story is. Okay, Umiknei Rav Haya Livnei Ruven Livnei Gad Atzum Ma'od Vayiru Es Eretz Yazer Es Eretz Gilad V'Hinei Makom Makom Mikneh. So the introduction, right? The stage is set. Okay, Ruvain and Gad had they had lots of cattle. Why did they have lots of cattle? We'll see. They had lots and lots of cattle, and they needed a lot of real estate. Okay, and they saw that the land of Yazer and Gilad, which we're going to see was the land that they won from their war with Sichon and Og, which is on the eastern side of the Jordan, which is actually debated whether that's considered Chutz La'aretz or not. Right? We actually had this in a class about a half a year ago where we were discussing a Gemara in Bechoros, if you remember, about bringing something from Chutz La'aretz, and the other Gemara gives an example if you bring it on the other side of the Jordan River. So there are a minority of opinions that say on the other side of the Jordan is actually considered outside of Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so anyway, so they wanted to settle because of their possessions. Again, it's very important to understand the backdrop. They wanted land over there because it was suitable for their great number of cattle. So the psukim said, so the pasuk continues and says, "Vayavo b'nei Gad b'nei Ruven." So they went to Moshe and they said the following: "Teres v'divon v'yazev v'nimar." They list all the cities. Pasuk 4, Haaretz asher hika Hashem lifnei adas Yisrael eretz miknehi l'abdecha mikneh. He says this is a great land. It's right. We conquered it, and now it's our land, and now we want our cattle there. And they told Moshe, "Vayomer imatzanuchem enecha yutan es haaretz azos lavadecha la'achuzah." Al Tivrina said, "We don't want to cross the Jordan River. We want it on the east side." So Moshe says, he says, that's not fair. He says, there's going to be battles on the other side, and what? You're just going to hang out on the other side and pretend you don't know what's going on? That's not fair. You're going to upset the minds of the rest of the 10 Shvatim that God gave. And then I'm going to skip a little bit. And if you go to pasuk 16, so right, we want to build here places for our flock, right, and for our children also, and towns for our children. And don't think we're going to just escape and not fight with everyone. Absolutely, we're going to go across, we're going to fight with the rest of the Jewish people, right? And we're going to fortify the cities, and everything is going to be great. We're not going to go home. Pasuk 18 says, until every one of them have possessions. Great. So it sounds good. So Moshe in Pasuk 20, 30-20 says, Moshe says, I have a solution. If you do this, which is what? What's the Tanai? If you send your fighters across the Jordan River and fight with your brothers, great. Then, Pasuk 22, a very famous pasuk. We actually had a whole shir on these 4 words about a year and a half ago, if you remember, about doing the right thing. Vihitem nikiyim Hashem, right? If you remember, we learn a lot from that pasuk about always presenting yourself in a right manner and never being choshud, right? Like, for example, like the Kohen wasn't allowed to go into the Kodesh HaKodshim with pants that had a pocket in it because people may think that he's sticking money in, right? Different things that you have to do. You have to bend over backwards to be out of the eyes and not be suspected by people. We actually learn a lot from these 4 words. We had a whole hour share on that, if you remember. Anyways, so getting back to Pasuk 23, 24, Moshe says, go build your towns. Everything will be great. And Pasuk 25, Bnei Gad, Bnei Ruvain say, okay, we agree. We'll do what you say. Vavadecha Yavru Kochalutz will fight. And here it is. 29, again, we have like round 2. Moshe says, just in case you don't understand what's going on, Vayamar Moshe Alehem, Im Ya'avru Bnei Gad Bnei Ruvain Itchem Es HaYarden, if you guys cross over the Jordan, Kol Chalutz L'Mulcham Lifnei Hashem V'nei Pasharet Lifneichem U'Natat El Nes Eretz Gilad L'Achuzah. That's part 1, right? That's the first side of the coin. If you fight, then you get Eretz Gilad as you requested. What's Pasuk 30? V'im lo ya'avru chalutzim itchem. If you don't cross over and fight, then then you should receive a portion, right, in the land of Canaan, like everybody else. And what did Bnei Gad say? Okay, we hereby agree. Okay, we listen to you. We will, when we cross, we will fight with everyone. and everyone will live happily ever after. Okay? And Pasuk 33 concludes it by saying, Vayitel lahem Moshe livnei Gadim leReuven u'chatzi shevet Menashe ben Yosef. All of a sudden, Chatzi shevet Menashe comes in. That's a shear within itself. Where in the world did they come from? There's at least 4 or 5 different opinions. What Menashe has to do with anything, right? Menashe wasn't mentioned up until now, but everybody knows it's 2.5 Shvatim. But the first 32 psukim do not mention anything of Menashe. All of a sudden, in Pasuk 33, Menashe comes to the play. Okay, not for now. Okay, so that's really the end of the Parshas Matos, and that's how it ends. Okay, so what I want to do is, because again, I feel that this is a very underrated story and not really learned, I wanted to just set the stage for the commentators. And when I looked into it, like a lot of things, there are very many debatable points, but the biggest debatable point that I found is whether or not Gad and Ruvain did a good thing or bad thing, right? Because from the psukim, again, without anything, just reading the verses, you don't really get a feeling as to did they have a right claim? Did they have a wrong claim? Was it fair, right? There's all kinds of questions you could ask. So I want to begin by reading a medrash, okay? And the beauty of a medrash is, if you learn midrashim before, especially Bereshis Rabbah, Bamidbar Rabbah, the way a medrash works is it tells a whole introduction, and the very end, it says, after this whole introduction, this whole story that I'm telling you, you could see a point and apply it to this pasuk. So I want to read it because it's a very, very beautiful medrash, and we could learn many things from it. I was pleasantly surprised. Says the medrash, Umikne Rav Haylev Ruvain, halacha. There is a teaching. Shalosh matanot nivru ba'olam. 3 gifts were created in this world. Zacha ba'achat mehen natal chemdas kol ha'olam. If you master any one of these 3 following gifts, you have attained the most desirable thing in the world. What are these gifts? Zacha b'gvura, zacha b'kol. If you're mighty, you were zocha to everything. Zocha b'osher, zacha b'kol. I'm sorry, I missed the first one. Zacha b'chachma, right? If you're zocha with chachma, then you have it all. You don't need anything else. Zacha b'gvura, if you attain gvura, right? Gvura, how do we interpret gvura? Strength, then you've accomplished it all. Zacha ba'osher, zacha b'kol. If you have money, then that's it, you accomplished it all. There's a big disclaimer though, okay? So don't get too excited. Ematai bizman shehen matnos shamayim ubaros b'koach haTorah. This is only considered a gift from God if it comes to the koach haTorah. Aval guraso va'ashur shel basar v'dam eino klum. But if it's a gvura or osher, or something that comes by human interaction, I'm going to see what that means in a second, eino klum, then that's worthless. And we quote a pasuk from Koheles, of course, and quote a few psukim, and we'll continue halfway down. It says, "Umatanos ela bizman she'enan ba'in min hakodesh baruch hu sofen lihi pasuk limenu." If it doesn't come from God, then it's not going to be everlasting. Shanu Rabosenu. The rabbis learned the following: Shnei chachamim amdu ba'olam. There were 2 great chachamim in the world. Echad miYisrael, ve'echad me'ovdei kochavim. A Jew and a non-Jew. Achitofel miYisrael. Achitofel, who we know, right? Stories of Achitofel from Shmuel, right? He was Jew. Ubila me'umas ha'olam. Ushnehem nebdu min ha'olam. And they both, because of their various sins, they were destroyed. There were 2 mighty men. Echad miYisrael ve'echad me'umas ha'olam. Shimshon miYisrael veGolias me'umas ha'olam. Shimshon and Golias. Okay, Ushnehem nebdu min ha'olam. We know how their story ended. V'chen shnei ashirim amdu ba'olam. Echad miYisrael ve'echad me'umas ha'olam. Korach miYisrael v'Haman me'umas ha'olam. We have Korach on one side and Haman on the other side. Ushnehem nevdu min ha'olam. Both of them destroyed. Lama shelo haya matnatna min hakadosh baruch hu, because their matana was not from God. Ela chotfin osalahen. We're going to see what that means in a second. It was they grabbed it for themselves. What does it have to do with anything in Parshas Matos? Right? This is the beauty of a medrash. You have a whole nice introduction. What does this have to do with the cattle of Ruvain and God? So here's the punchline. So first of all, they were the wealthy of the tribes, and their possessions were very numerous. And they loved their money. They loved it so much, they preferred to be outside of Eretz Yisrael. Remember we discussed the borders? So this is one opinion that says that the border of east of Jordan is outside the land of Israel. Okay, not a good thing. Lefichach, so why is there a lefichach? It sounds like because they couldn't control themselves and they loved their possessions so much, there was some kind of punishment. What was their punishment? Galu tchila mikol hashvatim. They were the first to be exiled. Shenemar, and we're going to quote a pasuk from Divrei Hayamim 1 that says, "Vayaglem l'Ruveni l'Gadi v'chetzi shevet Menashe." You know who the first tribes were to be exiled? When it came to the exile, when we have the lost tribes, so 2.5 of the lost tribes were Reuven, Gad, and half of Menashe. They came first. Umi garam lahem al shehifrishu atzum min acheim b'shvil kinyanam, because they separated themselves because of their possessions and their money. Mima shekasav b'Torah umiknei rav hayalu b'nei Reuven, because the Torah says. Now, before, well, you could obviously see that this is slanted toward the bad idea, right? Remember we had the debate, Reuven and God, good idea or bad idea? So this is obviously bad press on Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven. There's an interesting question. The Sfas Emes actually asked the kasha on this medrash. It says that what? It says that if it came from heaven, versus if it came from themselves. So the Sfas Emes asks, what do you mean from themselves? How could they grab right, the word is chotef, right? The medrash said, he says, the Sfas Emes says, chotfin la'atzman, af ki hakol ma'Hashem yisbarach. What do you mean? Everything comes from God. So if they took things by themselves, then that also came from God. So we need some clarification on this medrash. Says this Sfas Emes beautifully. He says, Mikol makom lefi hayediyah sheyodea ha'adam heitev shekol hashalom me'yizbarach. We all know that every single thing we have is God-given. Okay, a little mysticism over there. You know what the meaning of this? No, they believe that all their wealth is theirs through their own efforts rather than through God. So when they grab, it means they grab their wealth for themselves, claiming full credit without the credit of God. So that's what this medrash is really referring to. So obviously, we see that so far, bad news on Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven. There is another similar opinion that comes from the Das Zakanim and Bali Tosfos, which are a commentator on the Chumash, which is basically a book of compilations of early Bali Tosfos. It's not one author; it's many authors, and they jump right into the game, right? They jump right into the debate and seem to side with the Medrash Rabbah. They say, "Lefisha hayu ashirim biyoter chavu mamonam." They love their money. Ubishvil chibud mamonam pershu ma'acheim. They separated themselves and they sat outside of Eretz Yisrael. Quotes the Medrash. Therefore, they were exiled first. Quotes the pasuk in Divrei Hayamim, and they quote a pasuk in Tehillim that says, "Kilo mimotzo memarav lo memidbar harim ki Elokim shofet." You have to realize everything comes from God and it's not from man. Ze yashbo v'ze yarim. And he says the following: that pasuk in Tehillim says, "Klomer kol ma she'adam amel v'yotze b'schora when you go out and you make money, and you go from east to west and you try to make all the money you can by doing whatever you can, the dochek es hashal asher, and you push so much that you could make a living. That's not what makes you living. Right? Even if you go all these places and think that you discovered gold, it's really God who actually got you to go discover the gold. Okay? And he continues and he says, it's interesting that on a side note, he says over here, he darshens some of the words. Hebrew happens to be, as far as I know, the only language that each word has a word similar to it where it comes from. I'll give you an example. He says, the word harama, right? Lifting up, it elevates you. Ki Elokim shofet, ze yashpil v'ze yarm, period. Notel nechasim mizeh, v'notnen lezeh, right? Things come and go. Your nechasim, you could have it one day, you could lose it the next day. V'lama nikra shmam nechasim, the word nechasim, right? Possessions. Where does that word come from? Shehen nichsin mizeh v'niglan lezeh. It comes from the word covered up, right? Secret. It could be here today and gone tomorrow. It is closed to one person, but revealed to someone else. That's where the word nechasim comes from. V'lama nikra shmam zuzin, right? We have the word zuz, right? The zabenaba bitrei zuze, right? The chad gadya. What is zuz? The word zuzim shehem zazin mizeh v'hochen lezeh. You could have cash one day, the next day you make a bad trade, and your neighbor has your cash. That's why it's called zuz, from the word zaz, to move. V'lama nikra shma mamon, klomar lama atamone osam, right? And the word mamon comes from the word count, moneh, right? Like you would count it. V'lama nikra shma maos. Why is the word money ma'ot, mem ayin vav taf, shem mevatin es hamishpat? Because with money you could pervert justice. Okay, so he goes on, and on a just interesting side note, how beautiful the language of Hebrew is, that we have all these words that have secret etymologies, right? They're words that we just think, okay, nechasim means nechasim. But if you actually darshan the word, you know where it actually comes from, and there's a hidden message behind each of those words. I thought that itself was good enough just to say from this Miknei Rav. Either way, the bottom line is, again, we have another opinion that says not good what Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruvain did. So now we have two negative reviews. So let's try to even the playing field. And we're going to quote from the Kli Yakar. So the Kli Yakar says, it's interesting. You look at how the chapter starts. It says, "Umiknei Rav hayu b'nei Ruvain, v'livnei Gad atzum ma'od." So Umiknei Rav, they had Miknei Rav, they had a lot of Mikneh, and at the end of the pasuk, it says that they were strong, atzum ma'od. So why didn't it say Umiknei Rav atzum ma'od? It separates Miknei Rav and atzum ma'od. So the Kli Yakar notes that and says midolo arvin lomar umiknei Rav atzum hayashma mina shekol achad milsa bapenashe ki livnei Ruvain hayamiknei Rav b'mispar, because they separated it. Ruvain had what? Ruvain had Miknei Rav, a lot, but livnei Gad hayamiknei atzum, the koach. So Ruvain had the quantity, and Gad, it seems, had the quality. What do you mean quality? Because their goats were so strong, they could actually kill the wolves. Usually the wolf attacks the goat. Here it's the opposite. Here the cattle attack the ze'evim. So the Kli Yakar goes into a little history. We never knew this until we saw this. I bet no one here knew this Kli Yakar. What's going on over here? the Kliyakar explains that they wanted, because they had all this, they had these animals, they actually acted as protectors, like guard dogs. He says, so they wanted to sit on the sapar, on the border, because there was no fear. There was no fear, so they positioned their animals in front, almost to guard their town. So finally we have someone who's backing up what B'nai Gad wanted, right? We have a little bit of a more neutral opinion. The Kliyakar says it was kind of okay what they did, because the pasuk actually says that they stressed that they wanted place for their animals, and then they worried about their children. What they say to Moshe? Hey Moshe, we need place for our animals to roam. Oh, and by the way, cities for our children. So it sounded like they stressed the animals first. It's kind of like the Gemara we saw in Gittin a couple of weeks ago about how you have to feed your animals before yourself, right? Which is one of the few possible sources for Tsar Balei Chayim. But anyways, but here we see that they put their animals before themselves. Ki amru shesamuch legvul asapar nivna tchilas kederas tzon lumiknenu, right? And then we'll worry about the children, right? Because they were so sure that if they got attacked, the tzon would actually protect the children. Okay? Moshe said, no. And the punchline is, Mikol Makom, Mochicha Moshe v'amar im kein enatem botchim b'tshuas Hashem. No. We need bitachon over here. Don't think that it's your animals that are going to protect. It's bitachon in God. Elakach tasu lachem b'nu arim l'tapchem. You take care of your children first, then you worry about the animals. That's the spin that the Kliyakar has. Okay, beautiful Kliyakar. So he sounds a little bit more neutral. So now we're going more to the positive side. On the positive side is the Orach Chaim. The Orach Chaim, the first Orach Chaim is in Parshas Zosa Bracha. You remember what the bracha to God was? Baruch Marchiv Baruch. Right? So what does that mean? One who enlarges God. So says the Orach Chaim in Parshas Zosa Bracha, Perish Hirchiv Hashem lo b'nechasim rabim. The bracha of God is that he had lots of nechasim. Tichsev u'miknei rav hayalivnei runavnei God. Why? That's the question we have to ask ourselves. Why did God have such great wealth? We're reading chapter 32 in Bamidbar now. Do you know what happens in chapter 31? They were fighting. And Bnei Yisrael won wars with Midian and this country and that country. And all of the discussion, if you remember in the beginning of Matos, talks about meches, right? Taxing. They're discussing what happens to all the spoils. They split it up, and this guy got that guy got that. The Kohen get 2%, 5%, 10%, right? There's all kinds of percentages that are talked about when it comes to who keeps the spoils. So says the Orach Chaim, V'lihiyos b'nei Gad giburei koach bazuz yotim mekula. And he says, listen, the men of God were fighters. For whatever reason, they were the strong men of Bnei Yisrael. So therefore, they gathered more for themselves than any other tribes did. Right? So he's offering an explanation of how they become wealthy. So there's one explanation, and it kind of makes sense. And once you have that Orach Chaim, so now we understand a little bit why the Orach Chaim in back in Matos says the following: Tam hodazu, right? Lahatzdik hakasuv tam. So now we need all this information in order, says the Orach Chaim, to justify what their request was. Now that we just learned that they had a war, they won, right? And they got all this, and they got all these animals. So now to justify their request to Moshe, we understand why they needed such a large land of Sichon and Og, right? And most important thing is, because the Torah testifies that this was solid facts. So therefore, they really needed more real estate. It was a logistical problem. So it sounds like we went from negative to neutral, now to positive. Now, this shouldn't be too surprising because whenever we see these episodes in the Chumash, there's always, left, right, middle, there's always different ways of interpreting it. And as we see, this is another clear example. So the question is, how does the story end, right? The story ends off by Moshe allowing them, right? Moshe said at the end, right? Again, how did we get to this? Because we started to talk about the Tanai Kafel, right? So we learned about the Tanai Kafel. We know a little bit about the story of how they got their wealth, why they wanted, and what the reviews were, right? Did they have positive reviews or negative reviews? And the bottom line is Moshe at the end gave in. Now, did he give in? So sometimes when you have stories like Tzlafchad, the Makoshesh, right? The part in Emor where you have the one who cursed, right? So Pesach Sheni, right? I just mentioned 4 stories that happened that Moshe needed divine intervention. Here, Moshe didn't go out and say, okay, God, tell me what to do. Or maybe if he did, the Torah doesn't record it. Here, it sounds like Moshe came to the decision on his own. So the question is, why did Moshe give in? So believe it or not, there's a very short sforno that answers that question. On Pasuk 33, it says, Vayiten lehem Moshe livnei Gad leRuven es mamlechas Sichon, right? Moshe gave it to them. Ready for this? Says the sforno, Kedei shelo likanis b'machlokes, hiskim Moshe lidivreihem. So if you are medayik in the word, Moshe almost had no choice. He only did this because he didn't want to get into a controversy. He didn't want to get into a conflict with 2 tribes, right? Tens of thousands of people. So Moshe said, you know what? I'm going to give in. Was that right? Was that wrong? There's many opinions on it, but I think it's fascinating how he just almost took the easy way out and said, you know what? I'm not starting World War III over this, right? We have bigger fish to fry. I'm going to let you do it, but you have to fight with us. And I think that's a great ending about, giving in, right, to avoid fights. Again, a topic for a different day. Maybe I'll leave that as a cliffhanger. But at what point do we have to give in, even if it doesn't make sense? Is it the right thing to do? I don't know. A lot of ethical questions on that, whether Moshe had the permission to do that, because in effect, you're giving them land outside of Eretz Yisrael. This isn't proper border Eretz Yisrael. So that's, it's a little bit hairy. So we'll leave it on that note. Just parenthetically, there's a big discussion in Maseches Kiddushin with the Tosfos and the Ramban about whether this whole Tanai Kafel is only by Gittin and Kiddushin, or does it apply to everything? Most of Gemaras we had in Gittin and Kiddushin talk about this is your get on condition, this is I'm being Mekadosh you on condition. So it sounds like it's all related to Even Ezer stuff. And if you actually look in the Shulchan Aruch, the Even HaEzer says in 38, in Even Ezer Siman Lamed Ches, Kol tonight tzarich liyos daled dvarim. When it comes to a condition, you have to meet 4 requirements. One of them is sheyeh kafel. It has to be a Tanai Kafel, as we learned. Sounds like we paskin like Rav Meir. V'sheyeh hein shelo kodem alav. The affirmative, yes, has to be before the no, meaning if you cross the Jordan, then great. If you don't cross the Jordan, then deal's off. So the yes comes before the no. The 2 other things are Tanai kodem lamaisa, that the Tanai has to come before the Maisa, meaning, which was the problem, by the way, going back an hour to the Gittin, where the Maisa was before the Tanai about, here's your get, now I want the 200 zuz. right? It was flipped, right? If you would have said, I want money, and that will get you the get, that would have been different. And the last thing is it has to be that the condition is something that is actual possible to fulfill, right? If you don't have these four criteria, then the deal's off. Okay, so meaning what? Which is exactly what Rashi in Kedushin says, that if you ruin the Tanai, if you ruin this deal because the Tanai doesn't happen, then it's as though you said, Harriet Mukudeshesli, period, no strings attached. Or this is your get, no strings attached. So that's how we actually paskin in the Shulchan Aruch, in case you were wondering. All right, questions?